Well, hey, friends, welcome to the Everyday Mulemanship podcast. I'm Ty Evans. Thank you so much for being here today. We got a awesome guest on this episode, my friend Warwick Schiller, uh, accomplished author. He has a wonderful podcast as well called the Journey On Podcast. All of you should be listening to that. It's a good one. Warwick has been all over the world teaching clinics, and recently he has really made a big change in his own life, which is fun to talk about. We're going to get into a lot of that and talk about his adventures all over this world with horses, horsemanship, along with his spiritual journey, which I think is very valuable to talk about. And with that, I want to thank my sponsors that make this episode free for all of you. We got Roman Home Tents. If you like to hunt, fish, camp, get out there in the backcountry like me, you got to go with the Roman Home Tent. Check them out, romanhome.com. Also, my friend Colt Saddlery, uh, or rather, my friend Colt Naring at Colt Saddlery. If you're looking for a good custom built saddle that's going to fit your mule, fit your horse, fit your donkey, whatever you got to check out Colt Saddlery. And last but not least, Boyd Ranch Mule Days. It's coming up. It will be right around the corner. We can't wait. It's going to be awesome. Heading there in March. Come hang out with us. Come trail ride. Come do the clinics, the concerts, the dinners. It's just a fantastic time. So looking forward to that. And with that, let's get to work.
Okay.
All right, pal. Thank you so much. I sure appreciate you. Uh, it's been a pleasure to get to know you over the years. I first met you at the equine affair in Columbus, Ohio, I believe.
I think it
Uh,
was. And
and
and when I met you there, I'd had people tell me, "Hey, you need to meet this Thai guy, this mule guy. He's talking about the same stuff you're talking about."
yeah, yeah, one of my favorite quotes from Tom Dorrance is he says you have to treat the mule the way you should treat the horse.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of depth to that, and I know you speak about that a lot, and you talk about that a lot, in a lot of different ways. But man, I got a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about. First of all of my students know all about you because I have an online class, and your book is part of our curriculum.
Oh, really?
So yeah, everybody that
That's
takes the
cool.
class, they got to read your book.
Yeah.
so, so it's good because you talk so much about the principles, and I don't we don't necessarily need to dive into all the principles here. However, there's one that I really do want to dive as deep as you want to go, my friend, into relationship before horsemanship. That's the last chapter of your book, and that's the most important one. If you ask me, if I got a vote on the chapters, that's it. That one
I
wins.
think at the start of that chapter, it said this one should have been first, but I kind of, yeah, I'm not sure why it ended up last. It was kind of like you almost got to be in a certain place to be ready for that. And if it was first, some people might look at that and go, no, that's not for me. Whereas the rest of the book, they might go, oh yeah, I can get some stuff out of this. So it was almost like I felt like if it was at the start of the book, some people might go, oh, this is a bit too, yeah, that's not for me, and they would miss out on the rest of the stuff in the book. It's funny. I have a podcast, and I had a lady on the podcast from Sweden, and she was episode 115, and she looks at the world in a different way that it's just further along the path than most people sort of thing. And I'm glad she was episode 115 because if she'd have been episode number 2, I would have 0 listeners on my podcast because, I think you've almost got to be ready to take that in. And I feel like with the book, anybody could read the book from start to finish, but by the time they get there, by the time they get to that last chapter, they're kind of like, oh yeah, I can pick this up. I'm picking up what he's putting down. Whereas I kind of feel like if it was chapter 1, I don't know, some people might have not stuck around for the rest of the book.
I agree. It's kind of the same thing in probably both of our careers because, when I first started teaching clinics, and at that time it was mostly lessons, and then, it evolved into clinics, whatever. I mean, I think I had to pay my dues and prove that I could actually get something done with a mule or a horse. Like I'm talking about the physical stuff. Like can you teach it to stop? Okay, good. Can you teach it to turn and, side pass and, all these things? Like you kind of had to earn your keep at first. And then you have some credibility as to where somebody will actually listen to you for half a second. And then you can get to the really good stuff. The stuff that makes a difference. You know, I this is something I teach, and I know you teach it as well. And I say to my students, mulemanship, and for you, horsemanship is a lifestyle. You got to live it.
It's a way of looking at the world, is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And and that you can it's like an onion. You can go layer by layer as deep as you want to go in that. For some people it's just maybe getting in the right headspace before they go catch their horse. To other people it's much deeper than that, you know. But that's kind of some of the stuff I want to talk about is your journey with that, my friend, because um I appreciate what you're doing. You talk about the stuff that I wish more people would talk about because it makes a huge difference. And you know, in your book, I'm just going to read this real quick. I'm going to read a few excerpts out of your book. Okay,
Okay, let's hear
right
it.
in your introduction. Okay, this is probably my favorite sentence. I mean, in the first half of the book. Okay, I've spent most of my life in my head.
That's the first sentence, actually.
First sentence right there. Man, talk about that because that can go all kinds of ways. And I like the way you've taken it, but talk about what made you put that as the first sentence of your book right there.
Well, it's about, your it's almost like your struggles are your gifts. I once read a quote that said your vices are an excess of your virtues. And I feel like with horses, that's the same sort of thing. The problems you have with are actually probably too much of the good thing. Like one that if he sees you coming, he runs away. It's like, oh, well, he's got a lot of feel. He's just got a bit too much feel. Or one that, wants to come up to you and run over the top of you. Well, he's interested in me, but he's a little bit too interested in me, and it becomes a problem. But the reason I went with that is I was trying to explain how I came up with the book. I've always, they talk about left brain and right brain is the intuitive, artistic side, and left brain is the quantifying, right, wrong, yes, no, black, white sort of view of the world. And, and it categorizes things. And that's what, and that, doing clinics, you said you kind of got to pay your dues doing the clinics. And doing clinics, early on, what I found doing clinics was there'd be someone in a clinic and they will have received, well, I'll tell you how this first thing came about. I was doing a clinic in New Zealand a few years ago, and this girl had this horse. She did a little bit of reining with him, and when she said, oh, he doesn't want to spin very fast. And I said, well, that's it. And she'd ask him to spin, and she'd be pulling on the reins and kicking with the foot, and this horse would go step, 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 step. And I said, well, you're making it hard for him to turn. She goes, how? And I said, because the whole time he's turning, you're putting pressure on him. Ask for a step, bump him with your leg, and when he steps over, let go. And do it again, do it again, and do it again. And pretty soon that horse got to start to think about, oh, if I just step over here, that's where the sweet spot is. That's where I get left alone. And so I ended up staying with this girl's parents for a couple of days after the clinic. And she shows me a video from a clinic with a famous Australian horseman about 5 years before that. And he told her exactly the same thing, except he didn't tell her why she was doing it and what the horse thought of it and that sort of thing. And I started seeing that a lot, like people who had really good instruction, but it was only they were told, do this right now, not why you were doing this right now. So when the situation changed, they got home, they didn't know what they were doing. And so I really started to quantify things, or they really start to explain to people why you would do a certain thing. And then at clinics, you've got all kinds of horses, and maybe you got one that's too fast, and maybe you got one that's too slow. And I'd say, well, see, the reason we're doing this for this horse who's too slow is the same reason we did that with the horse who was too fast. And so I started kind of having people join the dots to where everything's not different, everything's kind of the same. And so that's kind of what started. And then as you do clinics, you come up with names for things or whatever. And I started saying, well, that's kind of a principle. And I gave it a name. And, after doing that for 15 years or whatever, I'm like, I've actually got a number of or actually what I did was, not RFD TV, what's it called? Farm and Ranch TV here in America. They said, would you like to do make a TV show for our thing? And I think they were thinking it's going to be your average horse training TV show. Today, we're going to show you how to change leads. Today, we're going to show you how to whatever. But what I called that series The Principles of Training, and I there was a first series, and then and I went through all the principles, so there was 12 episodes. This is before relationship, before horsemanship. Then I did another series, which was the same principles, but showing different versions of it. And I think about that time, Horse and Country TV in the UK picked it up and said they wanted to do it. And so then I made a third series for them. And by this point in time, I'm like, I could turn this into a book. Some people are visual learners, or some people like video, some people like reading. And I feel like it, and it wasn't written to be like, I want to get a book out there and make money off a book. It was, I want people to get this stuff, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I wrote the book, and it took me 4 years to write the book. Should have taken me 4 weeks, really, because I knew all this stuff, but my brain goes so fast. It was like 5 lanes of traffic coming into one. My fingers only type so fast, and I'd get kind of stuck. And then I had most of the book kind of written, but I was kind of stuck on putting it all together. And I didn't realize, but I was beating myself up because I was stuck. I didn't realize it till I had a podcast guest suggest I read a book called The War of Art by a guy named Stephen Pressfield. So not The Art of War by Sun Tzu, but The War of Art. It's about the war, the struggle of the artistic endeavor, mostly to do with writing. And so this guy was a screenwriter in LA. And he talked about the resistance. And he said, you'll get most of this thing written and you'll come up against resistance and you can't quite finish it. Everybody has that. And he talked about how to get through the resistance. But for me, once I realized that, oh, it's not just me. It's not just me that sucks. Everybody gets stuck at this point in time. I kind of stopped beating myself up because I was stuck. And then the rest of it just kind of came out. So yeah, really interesting how that works. But getting back to your original question, I've spent a lot of time in my head that really developed that skill of noticing things and categorizing things, and that's really what made me come up with those principles.
Yeah, that sentence caught me just right, Warwick, because um I can't tell you how many times as a child I got my butt kicked for asking why. I was the annoying little, I mean, I was probably pretty annoying. Somebody would say to do something and why? And it's not like a sassy teenager why. No, it's a legitimately, well, why do you do it that way?
It's a legitimate curiosity.
Yeah, and you will know in the horse world, in the horse industry, you ask some trainers why and they'll take offense to it, you
Mm.
know. Well, why do you do like that? Well, what do you mean why? And but for me, it's just like, no, really. Why do you do that? And so these principles that you talk about, as you're laying them out, I'm thinking of all these, instances in my life where I've seen these play out, and see, like, oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense. And, I mean, the majority of them I've pretty much lived by without even knowing it.
Oh,
I do these things. You don't even know that you're doing these things. And so for me, even all these years into my own career, your book put a lot of the why answers to it. And I appreciate that so much.
well, thank you.
But I've noticed that in a lot of good horsemen I've been around, and you know, uh, I'm sure you're like that too, where that why is something that makes a lot of people, good horsemen I've been around, makes them tick a little bit, that asking why and wanting to know a little deeper, you know. I had a friend come over and he's telling me he can never catch his mules and he can never catch his horses and he has a hard time being around animals. This guy loves mules, right? But he can't ever catch them. And I said, well, okay, well, go out there in my I have a pen full of a whole bunch of gentle mules and horses, right? Every one of my animals is just a friendly dog. Okay, it's really hard to turn my animals off. Right? This guy walks out there, my mules scatter, and I mean scatter. I'm like, well, you're the first that has ever done that. And then he's like, see, I told you. And I said, wait, hold on, hold on. What do you mean you told me? And he said, well, I told you, no animals like me. They don't like me to catch them. No, nothing likes me. And I said, wait, were you going in there expecting my mules to be hard to catch? And he said, well, I guess so. I said, well, that's your problem, bud. That's one of your whys right there. And
Mm.
anyways, these why questions just fascinate me. I was listening to one of your episodes about your spiritual journey on the gaucho,
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
which I would definitely want to talk about the gaucho derby because that sounds just intense. But you're talking about your experience helping some people catch the horses. Talk about that a little bit.
So so I did for those of you listeners who don't know what it is, I did well, what we call it, and it's adventure survival race on horseback. Not a horse race, and it's adventure survival race on horseback in the Patagonian region of Argentina earlier this year. So it's a 500-kilometer race. You have a 22-pound pack weight limit, which includes your saddlebags. And you've got to have your tent, your sleeping bag, your stove, food, extra clothing, survival, like medical kit, all that sort of stuff. So your packing is it's a big part of it. So that's one of the challenges of it. But anyway, so I did. There's a lady up in Oregon who prepares people for that race and for the Mongol Derby, which is a 1,000-kilometer race in Mongolia, and she has endurance horses. And so I went up there and I did a boot camp thing up there, a couple of years ago now. And then I was supposed to be doing the Mongol or the Gaucho Derby, sorry, in 2023. And in the middle of 2022, they cancelled it and put it off for a year. But they have a thing called the Academy they normally have before the Gaucho Derby that runs for a week. And you go down there and you actually experience what it's like. So I went down, I said, well, I'm going to go down and do that. And so we're at this estancia, they call it estancia, which is a ranch in Patagonia. And the first day I saw the gauchos going to catch their horses, it was almost like your friend. There's all these horses standing in this pen, and as soon as those gauchos walk in there with that intention, I'm going to catch you, all these horses just light up. Like, it's almost like they get up on their toes and they're ready to scatter somewhere. And then pretty soon there's just all these chasing around in dust and dirt. And I was just amazed that these guys are basically, they're cowboys. They make a living on horseback. But they have no idea how to catch a horse with ease and get the horse to want to be caught. It was just a mess. And so the first day we saddled up and rode down there, I got this one horse and off we go, and we ride. When we get back that day, they said, just turn them all loose, and tomorrow you'll have a different horse. And I said, can I keep the same horse? And they said, well, we'd like you to have different horses so you get used to riding different horses. And I'm like, I spent all my life riding different horses. And they said, yeah, you can get yours. And when we got back that afternoon, everybody wanted to go and drink wine. They had lots of Argentinian wine, Malbec there, and everybody wanted to go drink wine. And I said, can I hang back here at this pen and just mess with this horse for a bit? And they're like, sure, no worries. So everybody turned their horses out in the field, and I just turned this horse loose in this pen and just let him go. And I just basically, there's a thing I do initially with horses, which basically is communicating my awareness of their awareness. And I'll just I think I got a piece of plastic out of a trash can or something. I just walked around, I just crinkled a little bit. And if he flicked an ear towards me, I just stopped. And I got him to where he got really curious about me. And eventually he came up to me and I, caught him and how's it going? Whatever. And I saddled him too because they said you can't saddle him without hobbles. I'm like, So anyway, I got him to read stand there and I saddled him, turn him loose. So the next morning, the gauchos were going to go in the pen. There's probably 15, 20 horses in there. My horse is in there. And I'm thinking, if they go in, they're going to chase these horses around. I wonder if I can catch mine in that pen with all those 20 horses. I said, can I go in first before they go in? And they said, sure. So I walked in, I just focused on that one horse and I didn't care what any of the others did. But if he noticed me, I would stop doing what I was doing. I didn't have a plastic bag. I think I slapped my hand and just tapped my hand on my chink sort of thing like that. And if he noticed me, even over the backs of 5 other horses, I'd stop. Anyway, pretty soon he makes his way through the crowd. They all peel around, stand behind me, and he walks up to me and presents himself to get caught. So I knew, okay, it's not these horses are hard to catch. It's not like these criollos are a different breed of horse, because you know how you would have heard it at clinics. Oh, my horse is a halfling, or my horse is a whatever, and that's why I have problems. So anyway, on the Gaucho Derby one day, they have, it's a long explained thing, but they have time penalties. Like if you ride over time one day, you get a time penalty, so you can't start the next day the same time everybody else starts. And we're at this horse station where you've got to catch your own horses, and I can't catch mine yet for an hour, but everybody else is in there trying to catch theirs, and they've kind of got horses running all over the place. And finally, I said to the organisers, "Can I help them? I know I can't catch mine, but can I help them catch theirs?" And they said, "Sure." So I went in there and I basically did the same kind of thing. And I think I caught, 5 horses in 10 or 15 minutes or something or other. And they'd been in there half an hour chasing them around. But it's just that thing you're talking about before. You need to treat a mule like you should treat a horse. And, yeah, they were relatively easy to get caught, but they certainly have that. They can certainly sense that energy. If you walk in a pen with those gaucho horses and look at one of them with like a hard stare, they will just run to the back of the pack. Like they are so aware of your energy. And it's funny you're talking about your friend with your mules. I've got a new horseshoer. So this is his second time he's been here, and he's got a helper. And I was holding horses for him, and his helper said, "Oh, we've got 2 miniature ponies. They're not in together, but one of the miniature ponies is in with the oldest horse on the place. Is a 20-year-old horse. Anybody could catch this horse. Like I've never seen him walk away from anybody, let alone run away." And I'm in there holding horse, and all of a sudden I hear something outside, and I look out the barn door, and this horse and pony are just bolting around. This fella's trying to catch him. I'm like, I had to like settle down before I came on the call, because I felt like it just worked out. Like I was hot. Like it
Yeah.
affected me. Like, what the hell was going on?
Mm-hmm.
And if you had told me, I bet there's somebody who has a certain energy that Oscar wouldn't let him catch him. I'm like, not Oscar. Some of the others maybe, but not Oscar. But Oscar was out there running around like a wild man. So yeah, it's interesting.
Man, yeah, it's back to that word feel. I mean, it's just some people have a different feel, you know. Uh, that's interesting that at that Gaucho Derby, catching them like that. And you talking about those gauchos. That reminds me, I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of ranches out here in the Great Basin, And there's some guys that okay, I've been in some situations where there is uh we call him the jigger boss. The jigger boss, he's going to go out and he's going to catch the horses and he's going to assign you the horses and there's some that just are so smooth. They walk in there and different places have different standards for how they want to catch them. There's some that they want the horses facing up, some they want the butts to them. It really depends on how good the jigger boss can rope.
And then it'll just
That's
rope it from behind.
yeah,
Like, yeah.
yeah. Either if they're facing them, they'll rope them with a hula hand from the front, behind just a regular overhand. And some have so much feel. Those horses just are smooth. They come in there, it's quiet, kind of the no dust club. And then there's others that you're like, oh boy, can I just go catch my own, like you're talking about? Can I just catch my own horse? Because now you got them riled up. We're all going to get bucked off today.
Right.
Boy.
It's not just about catching them. It's like, what are they going to be like when you finally get them caught?
Yeah. And some of these places you go, it's kind of a circus for them every morning. Some of these ranches, it was particularly with the younger guys, they want a little bronc ride in the morning, and I don't.
Anymore.
Even though I rodeoed, I rodeoed for a good chunk of my life. I rode saddle bronc horses. No, 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 not anymore. I don't do. I'm retired from that. I don't want to do that anymore. But it's interesting how some places that's just the way it is for them. They think, well, this is normal. This is normal for these horses just to run around. They don't even know that there's a
Different
different
way.
option.
Mm. Yeah, it's like those guys in Argentina, that that boot camp I went to, I think I rode the same horse for 4 days. And it wasn't until the last day when I pulled his bridle off. Now, this is where it comes back to vices are in excess of our virtues thing, but I pulled the bridle off and he actually rubbed his head on me, and I thought it was a good thing because he actually wasn't half, leery of me sort of thing. He'd soften enough for me, like, oh, I've got a sweaty ear and I'm just going to rub my head on you. And I just let him rub on my shoulder. But I thought, wow, it took me 4 days to get to where he actually, because they're pretty robotic. Like they'll just kind of stand there and not move. And you got to see how these guys cinch their horses up. Like the country is so rough. You probably would have ridden in as rough a country, but it's all rough down there. But they cinch those horses up so tight, and they kind of got like a centerfire ring on their saddles. The first time I went down there, I saw them, they cinch a horse up and they don't untrack them. They tie them up and just gut them. And I didn't see one flip over backwards, but I don't know
Yeah.
why. But they'll get that cinch as tight as they can, and then they will turn around and back up to the horse, put the latigo over their shoulder and bend their knees, and then brace on it and straighten their knees and stand up. I've never seen anybody saddle a horse, cinch up a horse like that before.
Oh, geez. Well, you didn't see anything flip over because they probably already did before you guys got there when they're starting these horses last year, right?
Probably.
Who owns all these horses? Like,
Well, you're riding through private property, so you're riding through private ranches the whole time, and the race, you get 10 days to finish the race, and you ride 7 different horses in 10 days, or 7 different horses in the race. We finished in 9 days, so um, and you're basically riding the part of the race that you're riding that horse. That's the ranch they live on.
oh, okay.
So they're from the different ranches, and they're they're all similarly different. They're all handled in different ways. And so some are easy and some are, a lot of them are really hard to get on. You go to get on them and they want to swing away from you. But they've all got this little trick to as if, and like those gauchos basically jump on while they're moving. And if you try to stop that swinging away from your movement, they'll rear up. So many people got tipped off getting on.
Mm.
And it's also hard because you've got a big saddlebag behind your cantle. So you've got to swing your leg up over that while they're wheeling away from you. It's a bit of a show.
So okay, this is tough. And I know you did some of what I'm about to say, but okay, for me, like I still help a lot of ranches. I'm home in the winter like this. I'll go help, and we call it day working, right? You go
Yeah.
day work. And there's this unwritten rule that, so if I show up to help you at your ranch today, I'm doing things your way,
Right.
especially if I'm riding your horses. I'm probably going to ride your horses your way. Now, this is challenging for me. I usually sneak in my own horsemanship when they're
Oh
not
yeah.
looking. You know what I mean? I'm gonna like if I'm having some trouble, I'm like, and I usually try to end up using the same techniques on the rancher themselves. How can I make it easier for this rancher to let me do this, right?
Right. Yeah.
But there's always that quandary of, okay, you know, not my circus, not my monkeys type of thing, but at the same time, for me, like this horsemanship to me is it is my way of life. Like it's not just for me, this isn't what I do, it's who I am. And so it's very challenging. So like how did you mitigate that? Because I know you've also done the Mongolian derby. Is it derby there?
I didn't do the Mongol Derby. No, I did
No,
something totally separate.
no, you
My
rode the
son and I rode camels across the Gobi Desert in the middle of winter.
that's right, that's right. But how do you manage that in your mind of okay, well,
Okay. Well, on the Gaucho Derby, you get to catch your own horse for the most part. So I got to do that bit there. Then, a lot of those Gaucho horses, they're kind of freeze. Like if they're standing still, they're not standing still relaxed. Their eyes aren't blinking. Their muzzle's tight. They're just tight as a rock. And
Yeah.
so a lot of times if one was like that before I saddled him, I would just stick my finger in his mouth and do a little hyoid release. I just wiggle around there and get him starting to just let go and then blink and carry on, So, and the other thing I would do is, it's kind of like starting a colt, kind of like the principles of training, change one thing at a time. So these horses are not used to wearing a pack. And we've got to have this pack on them. And so what I would do as I get my horse, I'd saddle him and I'd keep the pack off the saddle. And then I'd cinch him up, lead him around a little bit, hop on and ride him around for a couple of minutes. Okay, we're good here. Then I'd get off. Then I'd put the pack on. Then I'd lead him around. Then I'd get on, ride him around for a few minutes. And then I'd get off. So you've got to wear a hydration pack on you. You've got to have your own water supply on you. And in the mornings, it's full. And if a horse takes to bucking, having, a gallon of water slosh around your back is not going to help with your balance. And so I'd leave that thing off too. And so I'd saddle him, ride him around a little bit. And this is a race on time, but so many people were in a rush. There was guys that left the race with one guy had collapsed lung, one going up with pneumonia because he was in a rush to get out of there and, stuff was happening. Yeah, so I'd saddle him, then ride him, ride him. And then when that was good, then I'd put my hydration pack on and then I'd get on. But the other thing I would do, most of these horses are very, very herd bound, like very herd bound. And, like I said, the guy that left the race with pneumonia because he didn't get flipped over him, but got flipped off the back of a horse rearing up twice right in front of me because he was trying to leave camp and the horse was wanting to go back. And he said, no, I want you to go straight. And the horse has a little trick, they just rear up. So what I would do is every horse I got on, I'd have them away from the corral that the horses were in. And when I swung up on them, I just let them go wherever they wanted to go. And of course, they'd beeline back to that corral. So then I just kind of ride back and forth and I'd just turn them into the fence, And I'd be talking to the gauchos. This is where, how do you slip it in? I'd go over there and be telling the gauchos, and everybody's in there trying to catch their horses. And I was like, I'm just watching these guys catch their horses, and they don't even know what I'm doing. And as soon as that horse would give this little inkling of thinking away from there, I'd let them go away, but then they go back. And I might spend 5 or 10 minutes doing that. But by the time you leave that horse station, your horse is going nice and forward. He's not rearing up on you. He's not thinking backwards, And that's that whole Ray Hunt thing, First you go with them, then they go with you, then you go together. And the people that had a lot of problems, they're the ones that, no, you're going with me and you're going with me from the beginning. There was no give and take to it. So that's kind of how I snuck, those horsemanship bits in was like that.
Yeah, that's keen. That's pretty keen. So what kind of people are on this race? Like, are a lot of them? I know you and Dan went, but like, are these endurance riders? What are they? These people,
Quite a
these
few
other
show
interns?
jumpers. There was a Swiss couple, or not a couple. There was a brother and sister. I think they're both show jumpers. In their like amateur show jumpers. I don't think any of them professional show jumpers. There was a couple of French fellas who rode a lot when they were younger, and they did a lot of show jumping and things like that. There's some eventers. Kansas Carradine rode with me. She was a trick rider in Cavalia. There was a Australian fella who's a helicopter mustering pilot, helicopter pilot mustering those big bulls up there in the territory. But he gathers cattle on horseback too. I mean, you've got to be able to ride pretty good to do it. It's not a trail ride by any means.
Right. So what was your why going into that? I mean, I told you I'm a white guy. So
What was my why?
to me
Well,
it sounds intense and it sounds really, I mean, to me it sounds like, okay, this is the real deal. I'd love to do it. But what was your why?
well, I had the girl I said that I went to Oregon to her boot camp. I had her as a guest on the podcast, and she had just come back so she's done the Mongol Derby, she's in the Gaucho Derby and a bunch of other adventure races, and she now crews for the Mongol Derby and the Gaucho Derby. And when I had her on the podcast, she was telling me about the Gaucho Derby, this 500-kilometer horse race in the Patagonian region of Argentina, which I thought I'd like to see that. That's supposedly beautiful. And I had just come back from riding camels 300 kilometers across the desert in Mongolia. The only thing we had to do was ride the camels. They saddled the camels for us. We had this six-wheel drive Russian army truck that followed us around that had our cook in it. And like he's cooked for Vladimir Putin. Like we had three-course meals for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The tent was set up. All you had to do was, the big the yurt was all set up. All you had to do was go to sleep. So the only thing you had to do was ride the camel. And anyway, she told me this race is 500 kilometers on horseback. I'm like, well, I've just ridden 300 kilometers on a camel. I can ride 500 kilometers on horseback. I didn't realize you got to fend for yourself. And I didn't know anything about the race when I signed up for it, except the distance and the animal. Horses, 500 kilometers, I can do that. And the more I learn about the race, the more scared I got. Like, and especially when we went down to the academy, one day during the academy was just medical briefings. They've got these guys who are, they've got this company called Intrepid Medics. So they do the medics for all these adventure races all around the world. One of the guys was an ex-French Foreign Legion dude. But anyway, they start talking about when you're out there on the race, you're the first responder. If you come across a body on the ground with a bone sticking out through their leg, you've got to know what to do with it. And but it got really serious when they said, now, if you come across somebody who is on the ground and their feet are pointing directly away from each other, like you when you rode broncs, okay? Toes pointing east and west sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, they're big on consent. So the first thing you're going to do is like, hello, I'm here. Can I touch you? Okay, don't just grab a hold of somebody. Can I touch you? And they're big on the consent thing, but they said if someone's laying there on the ground with their feet pointing east and west like that, don't even ask them. Just grab their feet and pull them together and put duct tape on their feet or something like that. And we're all like, why? And they're like, because when their feet look like that, you've got what we call a open book fracture of the pelvis. So your pelvis is cracked in two, and that opens up a big opening inside your pelvis. And that bowl of your pelvis, and I don't know what the number is, but I'm going to go with 7 liters, I think, whatever the number is. But they said, so that bowl will hold 7 liters of blood, and your body holds 7 liters of blood, so you can actually bleed out internally.
Jeez.
Right about then, the room got
Man.
silent.
Yeah.
Holy shit, we can think of this sort of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't. So until you just said that, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about, wow, this is a cool ride. This isn't, you know,
Because most of this country is pretty rough, so you
yeah.
can't drive a vehicle to you. And they have a couple of medics on horseback throughout the race, but the race gets spread out. You know what I mean? And so you might, if you have
Yeah.
and I talked about now, if someone's been backed off onto a fence post and the fence post is sticking in them or through them, do not pull the, things like that. Do not pull the post out.
Yeah.
Like Steve Irwin and the Stingray sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So when they started talking about that, then I'm like, holy cow.
Yeah. Geez. Yeah. That's a lot more serious stuff right there.
Yeah, and probably the biggest worry for me is it's cold down there and the wind is insane. Like before I went down the first time, they said the wind down here is biblical. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like there's some good things in the Bible and there's some bad things in the Bible. Which one of those two things is it? They're talking about the bad side. I've never seen a horse's ears blown over parallel to the ground, like looks like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. But in the race on the first day, probably in the first hour, it was so windy on the side of this hill, my horse's ears were blown completely sideways, parallel to the ground.
Wow.
And so if you get wet at all in that sort of wind, it's going to be miserable. And I went to an endurance race in Southern California before the Gaucho Derby and borrowed an endurance horse. Actually, Kansas Carradine, who came on the Gaucho Derby with me, she did it too. So we're going to have our mini Gaucho Derby. So we took our tents. We're going to eat the same food we're going to eat on the race, the dehydrated stuff. We took our little camp stove things, and the winds down there were terrible. And second night down there, I snapped a tent peg in my tent. So the tent completely collapsed on top of me. And I was like, screw this, I'm going to a hotel. I just pulled the whole thing to pieces and went to a hotel. But you can't do that in the Gaucho Derby.
Yeah.
I probably had nightmares for a long time before the Gaucho Derby, thinking, what if it's pelting down rain with the wind blowing like that and I snap a tent peg? Because you've got to get up and you've got to repair your peg, but you've got to get outside the thing. You're going to get wet, cold. Yeah, that was probably one of my biggest fears was the wet and cold in the wind thing, which we didn't get much rain, so it was good.
Yeah, you were talking in your podcast about how um, it was finally a relief when you got in and you got your pack weighed because you were stressing about how much stuff was going to weigh, and you're talking about all these things that you're saying now. Uh, Being out there and actually doing it's kind of the yeah. It reminds me of like riding broncs. It really does because there's all this anticipation.
It's
You get your
wait is the
draw and
worst.
you're like, oh, that's a rank one. Oh, he's done this and that. And all the anticipation. And once you're finally there, you're like, nah, I'm okay. I'm gonna be all right. This is okay.
Yeah, once you're climbing over the chute and you measure your rain, you're in the moment, and
Yep.
yeah, yeah, that's the easy bit. Yeah, it's all the wait is the hard part, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
You said
once we
something.
got in the race, it was like you're in it. You're not thinking
Yeah,
about it at all. You're just doing it.
I seen some pictures of you and Dan, and I you posted about that documentary that he kind of made up there, and I still haven't seen that yet. I got to find that somewhere, wherever that is. I can't
Yeah,
find
I
it,
don't
but
know where they're going to release it or whatever, but it used so I signed up for it first, and then Dan decided he wanted to come along, and then he invited Elliot Holtzman. You know Elliot?
I don't.
He's a horseman from North Texas there. And then my friend Kansas Carradine, who was the trick rider in Cavalier, she had, probably a year before the race, she said to me, "Oh, I wish I could do that." And I said, "Oh, well, it's all full now." And well, about 6 weeks or 2 months before the race, one of the organizers contacted me and said, "Hey, we've had someone pull out. Do you know anybody who might want to do it?" And I said, "Well, I had someone mention it, but I don't know how serious she was." So I hooked the two of them up. And so Kansas went from not going to do the Gaucho Derby to 2 months before going to do the Gaucho Derby.
Man,
Anyway, so
that's
we all
yeah.
we all went together. But when Dan made that movie, it was my footage, Dan's footage, and Elliot's footage, and he used all of those for it.
Yeah, I saw pictures of you guys all bundled up. There are a few moments there. It looked like, yeah, you talking about that wind, and man, looked like the real deal down there. That's for dang sure.
Yeah, and the thing about being bundled up, even on days when it's not that cold, you still got to be bundled up against the wind. So you're active all day long. You're riding a horse or leading a horse up and down mountains, 12 hours a day. And there's, if you've been camping or whatever and you don't have a shower for a couple of days, there's a body odor. But when you are that rugged up and putting that much effort out for that many days in a row, the smell is a completely different smell. It's nothing I've ever smelled before. It's not body odor smell. It's just
Yeah.
this sour.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I've met a few guys on ranches that probably smell like that. Yeah. You know, uh, you said something, and I'm probably gonna butcher it here, so you correct me.
Butcher
Um,
away.
you said the person. Let's see. The there's the person there's how you started. There's the started you, and there's the finished you.
Mm.
Like I said, I just probably killed that, but you talked about that in your race there. So, and that just made me think about life and horsemanship. I mean, just there's so many things like that. It's interesting as I was reflecting on that, the person you are when you start and the person you are when you finish. I was just thinking back to my short career doing clinics. I've been doing clinics for 13 years, and I am completely different than when I began. The things that I thought was so important 13 years ago, now I'm like, no, I mean, I don't even mention those things hardly.
Yeah, things get clearer, don't they? Like
Yeah.
you can see the deeper truth in things, and you can see, yeah, a lot of the clutter goes away, and you see the real thing in the yeah. And like I said before about the book, the person who gets to the end of chapter 12 and is about to start chapter 13 is not the same person that started reading the book. And so if I had chapter 13 at the start, that's the person who's reading chapter 13. Our podcast, we have all these interesting guests on the podcast, and we've been having a yearly podcast summit where we get the presenters from the podcast and they present on stage over 3 days to an audience, And there's one lady, she was a marine animal trainer here in California, trained sea lions and all that sort of stuff. And then she gave that up and moved to England to become a Buddhist nun. But anyway, she was on stage. We had a podcast summit in England, and she was on stage with me. We were talking about something, and I said something along those lines. And she looked at me and she said, "You will not survive this conversation." Meaning, you will not be the same person at the end of this conversation. The you think you are will not be the same you at the end of the conversation. So you will not survive this conversation.
Man, that's fascinating.
Mm.
You could say that about every ride.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. You can start your clinics out saying you will not survive this clinic.
Yeah.
The you that you are now, you think you are, at the end of this clinic, that person will have dropped away and there'll be a different you here.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about that is you're not trying to run a therapy sort of a thing, but for the most part, when you find at clinics, people have to change their, most of the time it's not about the technique that you get them to do that makes the change. It's about the perception change they have. And I'm sure you probably get a lot of people who come to a clinic thinking that mules are stubborn. Do you ever get that?
Oh boy. Yeah, that's it. That's the ringer right there. That's
Yeah.
the
But think
magic
about
word.
that. Someone comes with that long-held truth,
Mm-hmm.
mules are stubborn. Everybody says mules are stubborn. Everybody knows mules are stubborn. And they get to the end of the clinic and they're like, oh, they're not. And I love that. I mean, I love that about everything I'm doing these days, whether it's the podcast, a clinic, whatever, is when you can bust someone's one of somebody's many long-held truths. And let's say it's the mules are stubborn. Come to the clinic, mules are stubborn. Enter the clinic, they're thinking mules aren't stubborn. And I've always believed they were. And that was just my belief. Then you kind of open the door for them to start doing a bit of soul searching about what other beliefs do I have that I always thought were a truth and they aren't. And I think that's the cool thing about this stuff is you open the door for people to look at the world differently. You just, you only have to do one of them. And then they, if they're introspective at all, they'll start to go, what else did I used to think was I used to think my wife was grumpy. Maybe my wife's not grumpy. Maybe the way I interact with her makes her grumpy. You know what I mean? Like you just opens the door for all sorts of introspective thoughts.
Yeah. When I was, and I'm going to share this on the show, and it's my show, so I guess I can, right? When I was about 17, I got a blessing from one of my church leaders.
Mm.
And a sentence that just kept ringing in my mind, and it still does, Warwick, it really does. But he says, the things that are of so much importance now will be of little importance then. And when he gave this to me, okay, 17-year-old Ty, all right, I'm rodeoing, high school rodeoing, about to go into college rodeo. Bronc riding's my life, right? Like that's what I
Important,
did.
isn't it?
I mean, rodeos outweighed all the things, school dances and dating and all those things. No, rodeo, right? So, and it's funny reflecting back on different things, and you know what's so important and what changes. You know, um, I like to start out my clinics in a couple different ways. I usually walk in and ask the students what day is it, and they go, Thursday. Most of my clinics start on Thursdays. Thursday, or June 10th or whatever. And I just keep going. And usually there's a handful of repeat students, and they know me. So they know, hey, this is the best day ever. And I'm saying this or trying to get the people to say this as their mule or their horses, dragging them around. Right. So they're thinking, what the heck are you talking about, man? Help me with my mule, you know? And and it's kind of like that, you know, like these things that, you know, these people are so stressed about something so little, you know, and you just try to get them to see a different little picture. The other thing I say to them is, and this usually gets them thinking, and this is usually on the days that you probably find this. There's days that I am definitely a deeper thinker, and there's days that, you know, you're kind of tired and you're kind of like, well, more surface level, I think, you know. But some days I'll go in there when I'm really feeling it, and I say, you know, there's more to this horsemanship and mulemanship stuff than bits and spurs. And then I just pause. And and then it's kind of fun, depending on what mood I'm in, to ask them, so what do you guys think about that? And some say, well, yeah, you have your seat in your leg, you know, or they'll say they'll want to give some aid or some cue. And then I say, well, those are all great answers. I appreciate your input. I just want you to keep that in mind as we continue to work. And then I'll ask them, you know, we'll do something on the ground, and I'll say, okay, you have multiple ways of getting this mule to move. We want this mule to go, you know, over here, for example, to your left. Okay. And they say, okay, Mike, okay, give me what could be the order of operations? How would you initiate this movement? And, you know, some people say, well, you point your lead rope over there, or you give them a smack, you know, or, you know, whatever, you know, there's all these different answers, you know, all of them. And, and I'll say, well, these are close, but what else could we do? I said, let me give you a hint. How could we get this mule to move without you moving anything in your body? You know, and they get to think and they're not sure. And, you know, you get to visualizing, you know, you get to picturing things. And, you know, you got it in your book. And, you know, talking about seeing things how you want them to go. And man, that's such a game changer. It's been such a game changer for me in life when I started thinking about things, you know, how I want things to go. You know, I feel like you're really good at that, you know, thinking about things and visualizing, you know, I think that's very important. Have you ever read With Winning in Mind by Lanny Basham?
No, I haven't. You wrote that down.
Oh man. So speaking of rodeo, I'm looking at a picture ahead of me over here. Me and my late coach Louis Fields. Do you remember Louis Fields?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Case Fields' dad.
Yeah.
So he was such an influence in my life work. He was one of my main mentors. Talk about a man that had things figured out. I mean, he was a cool guy. Really, I mean, just so cool. And he would make us do these weird exercises. At the time I thought they were weird. You know, like we're here for the practice pen and give us some bucking horses, you know, and he'd say, so what are you thinking about? What are you doing? When that horse jumps out, what are you going to do? And he'd just ask questions like that all the time. He'd pose different scenarios to us all the time. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And whenever we'd have a negative thought, or you know, we'd let our mind go off one way or the other, he would say, well, how would you get out of that mess? Or what would you do to correct that? Or how would you mitigate that? And he would, and we'd say it out loud. He'd say, well, think about it first. Think about it, you know? And I didn't realize at the time how valuable this was. So fast forward, he's passed away. I'm listening to a podcast with Casey and his traveling partner, Tilden Hooper. And they're talking, and Tilden's joking about how Louis made him read this book, you know, with winning in mind. He said it was Louis' favorite book. So I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, if it's Louis' favorite book, I got to read this, right? And it's all about this Olympic shooter. He's a rifleman, and he's a gold medal winner. And he talks about, you know, mindset and thinking and visualizing. And what does he call it? He doesn't say visualizing. Um, he calls it rehearsing, you know, because he says, well, you know, it's like a rehearsal. If you're rehearsing for a play, you're actually doing the play. You're actually doing it. It's not like make believe. you're doing the thing. And he talks about the value of it, and man, it's just that kind of stuff makes such a difference when you think
Oh,
about
yeah,
stuff.
yes. And, I think that should be a class in school. And I'm not talking about the 12th grade. I'm talking early on. And it should be one of the classes in like every year you should have it.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like math and English sort of thing.
Hmm.
Once you understand uh, the the value of that, um, and we're all kind of wired to look at all the things that might go wrong. You know, um, have you did you ever hear of that book that Gary LeFew was on about a lot, Psycho-Cybernetics?
Yeah, yes, yeah. I got it on my shelf over here. Yeah.
Mm. He was
So,
reading that stuff in the early 70s.
oh yeah, he's so big on that. Thinking and picturing and seeing yourself. And I think there's an interesting talk to be had about how much is um because there's some people that don't want to think about anything negative at all, and it's kind of like how you were just talking about thinking about the Gaucho Derby. You're thinking about all these things that could go wrong, but you're not just thinking about the things that go wrong. You're also thinking about how you're going to fix it. So what if my tent pole does break? Okay, well you mitigate it, and you're thinking about it. And that's like what Louis would do with us. Is he would make us think about scenarios. Okay, well the horse just reared out of the chute and it slammed your leg on the post, and you're tipped out of the saddle. What are you going to do? And you could, in my mind, it's so easy to think about that and go, "Oh, well, I'm bucked off." you know,
Right,
I I can't tell you how many times I've visualized stuff and my brain takes over and it bucks me off. It's like, dang it, they got me. But he would try to get it back, and but I think it takes a strong mind though to be able to do that. I think in the beginning, like my students when they come, like, all I want you to do is focus on what you want. That's it. Because if you don't know what you want, how is your horse or your mule going to know what you want? And how is your body going to know what to do if you don't know what you want? Just think about purely what you want. And they'll say, well, but what if they do this? I'm like, okay, we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. Maybe next year. I don't know. But
right.
right now, what do you want? Just focus on what you want. That's been a huge discovery for me.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of I don't know if it actually happens, a story about a mixed martial arts camp for the weekend? These guys, so it's
I
a
don't think
weekend
so.
mixed martial arts camp. So these guys come along and they're going to work on their mixed martial arts stuff. And they get there Friday afternoon. So it's a short session Friday afternoon, and then there's Saturday and Sunday. And so they all get there. They go in the octagon on Friday afternoon, and there is I think it's like a 6x6 beam laying on the floor of the octagon. It's about 12 feet long. And he goes, okay, everybody line up over here and just walk across that beam. So they all balance across the beam. And he goes, now go back across it again. So they balance across the beam. They think this is a warm-up exercise. He has them go back and forth across that beam for an hour. That's all they do. No punching, no kicking, no grappling, no sparring. And he goes, okay, that's good. Well, have a good rest. We'll see you in the morning. And there was 10 or 12 grumbly amateur
Yeah.
MMA guys wandered out of there because they're thinking, this is crap. Anyway, they come back the next morning and that same beam is still in the octagon, but it is now on scaffolding and it's 12 feet above the floor of the octagon. And the only thing you have to do is climb up the scaffolding and walk across it. And no one can walk across it. And he said, that's exactly the same beam you walked across yesterday. And he says, mixed martial arts is a mental game. He said, if you're on your back on the floor and there's a guy kneeling on you, sitting on your chest, kneeling on your arms, and he's punching you in the face, you cannot be thinking about being punched in the face. You have to be looking for openings. Like as his right hand comes back, can I get my left foot up under his armpit or whatever? You know what I mean? And he said, you guys are weak-minded because yesterday you were focused on the beam. Today you're focused on the drop. the beam is what you've got to stay focused on. And it was like, I don't know if it was actually a true story or not, but I tell it at clinics a lot because it's like, you've got to focus on, like you said, what you want to happen. You can't be focused on the other thing. And this was exactly the same beam. The only thing that was different was there was a drop.
Yeah, it messes with you, messes with your head.
Mm.
It really does.
You were talking about what you say at the start of clinic sometimes, and there's a cutting horse trainer in Australia who he was really into martial arts. I don't know. I've never seen him do it, but they say he could take a steel can of baked beans and make like a pistol with his finger and punch it through there. But anyway, I've heard he starts out his clinics and he says, so I want to talk about the 3 U's. And everybody's thinking, why are we talking about sheep, female sheep? And he says, there's 3 U's. There's the U that you show to people, strangers you meet. There's you that you show to your close friends and family. And then there's the you that your horse sees. And
Yeah.
that's like, whoa, that's the stuff right there. Because,
Mm.
because they read through all the BS, don't they? You can't pretend to be somebody you're not with horses and mules.
Yeah, they know you. They know you better than you know yourself. Sometimes I'll say, your mule has read the book you didn't even know you've written. You know,
Yeah.
they know you. You can't you ever, you've heard the term fake it till you make it. And that's interesting. We could talk about that all kinds of different ways, but I tell you that's not real. That's not real with your horses and your mules. That's you don't get to fake it when you make, fake it to make it. And I say, when you think you're faking it, whatever it is, maybe you're trying to, whatever, be brave to get on a colt for the first ride. And you say, well, okay, I'm gonna pretend to be brave. I'm gonna pretend to be brave. No, you're actually being brave. You're actually doing the thing that you think you're pretending to do. There's no really, it's not fake. You're actually doing it,
Mm.
but I said, nonetheless, they know you and they can feel you and they, your intentions. Um, we have a mutual friend, Dr. Susan Fay. I just had her on my podcast a couple weeks ago, and
Funny, I was just down at the barn. I was thinking about her. I think contacting her this morning. That's funny you mentioned her name.
yeah, I mean, she's so amazing. But she's talking about. I like how these things that to people like me, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor. I don't have any letters behind my name. I'm just a horseman, But she she puts the science to these things that we talk about, like talking about that guy that came over to catch my mules, right? And you know, we can talk about all the psychological stuff of his thoughts. He didn't expect to catch him, and he was right. It's like Ray Hunt says, "Well, whether you think you're, you know, or not Ray Hunt, but who is it that says whether you think you can or you can't, you're usually right." Uh, Henry Ford or whatever. But but it's she puts the science to it, right? Like, well, your heart, they can feel your heart 40 foot away, and the things you're putting out there, it's real. It's not just some mythical make believe stuff. This is actually real. And trying to share that with people, it's like this. We're going off on these things, and it's kind of like open up your book. That first chapter of the book. If you go into these things right off the bat, then some people get a little spooked off. But it's just kind of like, the more you turn the pages on this stuff, I just can't get enough of it.
I think
It's my
once you
experience.
realize how, how energy and intention work and how related to each other they are, and how, you think about, how am I talking to you right now? I'm talking to my computer, which is connected wirelessly to my router. So there's an energy goes to there, and then it goes to there, and you go, like, all that stuff's going on around us right here. When we're a part of that. I listened to a podcast. Someone suggested I listened to this podcast a while ago, and it's by a guy named Sean Ryan. Ever heard of the Sean Ryan show?
Yeah.
Sean Ryan was a I think it was a Marine. Most of it's like military stuff. I don't usually listen to like military type podcast, but this guy named Colonel Gerald Alexander on there, and he was big in the Army's bid during the Cold War to use like telekinesis, remote viewing, and stuff to like um, figure out what was going on in the Kremlin during the Cold War. You know, they had people who could see things in rooms in the Kremlin and draw pictures and all sorts of that sort of weird stuff, you know. And he was telling a story about this guy was the Army's leading lie detector guy. And he lived in New York City, I think, and he had house plants. And one day he's watering his house plants and he's like, I wonder how long it takes the water to reach the leaves. So he hooked the lie detector up to the leaves of the thing because the lie detector, part of it has a galvanic skin response, so it measures moisture, you know, if your palms start to sweat. Anyway, he figured out that however long the moisture takes to get to the leaves, but then he left the thing hooked up and he noticed over a period of days that the lines on it would go up and down, up and down. And it's like he said, this plant is responding to something, and I'm not sure what it is. So he started kind of monitoring, like taking notes of things he was doing, and he figured out that the plant was responding to the emotions of the human in the room. Now we're getting into Dr. Susan Fay stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
this is the army. This is not someone trying to sell you something or convince you of something. The army
Yeah.
actually doesn't want you to know about this stuff. You know, there was a big army thing called MK Ultra. Did you hear of MK Ultra?
Mm.
It was the thing like I'm talking about with the remote viewing and the telekinesis and all that sort of stuff during the Cold War. And the army didn't want you to tell you about that. But yeah, like when you start to understand those things, it kind of makes you think. There's a lady I was talking about before. She was episode 115 on the podcast. She was the one that, good thing she wasn't number two because no one would listen. But
Yeah.
she was at our podcast summit in England this year, and she started out with she said, she's Swedish, so she got a little bit of an accent. She said, I'm going to give you a quote from the Islamic scriptures. And it starts out the something of man, like the future of man or something or other is tied into the forelock of the horse. And then it goes on a bit and blah, 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 blah. And then she stops. So she's read this little scripture thing, and then she stops and then she says, so kind of like this gathering here, we started out with horses and we ended up with God. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you do this
Yeah.
stuff enough, you get to where it's almost it becomes almost like a spiritual practice without you even wanting it to be. But when you start to understand how much influence our thoughts and our energy and our expectations and all those things have on a sentient being that's across the arena or across the round pen or something or other, you kind of start to feel a little bit small, which is good.
Yeah. You know, something that I often ponder on, and it really got me to thinking. So, uh, I have students that send me books all the time, and it's actually one of my favorite things. Honestly, I'm not telling my students, if you're listening, you don't have to send me a book, okay? But I love it when I show up, to the PO box, and I got a book from somebody, and somebody sent me a book called Kinship with All Life. Have you read Kinship with All Life? J.
Yeah,
Allen Boone.
yeah,
Yeah. First time I read it, I thought, man, this is weird. This is like weird stuff, And I'm like, I'm gonna read it again. And it got my, I'm a definitely a proponent for pondering, like we need to be better to ponder things and really think about things. We don't just have to react. We can ponder and then respond. That's what I want my horses to do, is to think about things and respond. I don't want them just to be blind reactors, right? Anyways, she sends a note with this book too. She says, "Hey, this is one of Ray Hunt's favorite books." And I'm thinking, wow, I didn't even know Ray Hunt liked to read. I just, uh, I mean, when does that guy reach? He's on a horse all the time, and he's busy, anyways. So I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting. I mean, I read that book and it got me to thinking, how does God or how does God communicate with animals? Like I have a hard time believing that we'll show up when we die and go to this afterlife. We'll show up and he'll need his his halter and his spurs and his whips and his like, like and I'm not dissing anybody, whatever. If you need spur, you need a spur here. What I'm not telling somebody here how to do something. I'm just saying I'm having a hard time believing that he'll need to do stuff like that. And it got me to actually search into scriptures work and so when God and when Christ commands a mountain to move, it's not some magical mythical thing. No, the mountain moves. Well, how does the mountain move? Well, we know that God has control over the elements. So what are the elements? You start thinking about these things. And we know that before the Tower of Babel, especially, there was a universal language, right? Like the Tower of Babel, that's when all the languages were corrupt. That's when everybody, you know, got broken up, right? Okay, well, what about the animals? What about the animals? Like what is this universal language? And the thing that keeps coming to my mind, and it's what we're talking about is what do all creatures have? We have a brain of some kind, right? There's different, right? Mammalian, reptilian, all that stuff, but we have a brain and we can think, in some way or another. Anyways, that's got me, you know, doing all kinds of things, and I'm picturing things, and you've been around cattle, you know how this works. But and I was talking to Martin Black about this the other day too, a little bit about picturing. So when you're moving cows, okay, and you're trying to take them point A to point B, and you got to go through a gate, and maybe it's a difficult approach to the gate. Just think about it. Think I this I've been playing with this when I day work. Whenever I have the opportunity, I picture those cows. I see it in my mind's eye. Picture those cows going through that gate. Click, 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 click. I'm thinking about it. When I have a good mindset, it works really good. It's when there's distractions, and when I've noticed the most distractions, and this is the interesting thing, and you've probably found this too. It's easier for me to get cow work done when I'm by myself. When there's a
Mhm.
group of people, it's harder. And it's easy on the surface to say, well, it's because they screw it up. No, no, no. That might be partial. Maybe they are in the wrong place, wrong time. We could pick on that. We could pick on stockmanship, right? But I'm talking about myself. How come I'm so distracted when there's other people? How come I can't focus on that? How come when I'm by myself, I can get those cows to get on in there, no problems, no drama, no dust. It ain't that big of a deal. But when I'm out, with a bunch of people, it usually ends up being a cluster. And it's better if I'm not even there, you know.
Do
But
you, but do you think it's it's part of the energy of those people? Like they kind of got that energy. They want the cow to go through the gate, and as soon as the cow looks at the gate, almost like there's pressure comes on there. I had a horse at a horse expo in California a few years ago. Off the track thoroughbred came in like poor guy was losing his mind, sort of thing. And I usually let the people lead him around for a while so the crowd can see what the horse is like. And then they see the difference when I start doing whatever it is I do. I don't start out right away because sometimes I'll just hand you the lead rope and things are different. But anyway, this horse towards the end of the session, but this horse I started kind of matching steps with him and just letting him walk around and going with him. And he started sniffing the ground and he's kind of walking in circles and sniffing the ground. And I said to the crowd, so what is this horse doing right now? And they said, he's going to lay down. And I said, no, he's actually walking in circles, sniffing the ground. I said, you can't have that, oh, he's going to lay down energy because it's palpable. I said, so just everybody relax. but I could still feel everybody had he's going to lay down energy. And this horse was kind of walking around sniffing the ground, but the knees weren't buckling. He was just walking around sniffing the ground. And then the announcer came on and said, Warwick, you have 2 minutes left to go. And you felt that expectation of this horse is going to lay down, left the crowd. It went away. Like I felt it go away. And he walked 2 more circles and down he went. But he wasn't going down while they were thinking, go down. And so it's kind of the same thing, I think,
Yeah.
probably with a lot of people with working cattle. Like as soon as the cows are going towards the gate, there's a lot of energetic kind of push. It's funny you're talking about cows and that I was here, this is probably 5 or 6 years ago, when I was really starting to think about this stuff. I was at a horse expo, and you know what's like at those horse expos. Sometimes you're working with a horse or people or whatever, but sometimes you got to do like a classroom sort of a thing. And this was at the Western States Horse Expo in Pomona. And I was going to be doing a talk about, I think it's life lessons I learned from horses or something or other. And I go up the front, turn around, and Kurt Pate is sitting in the second row. You know Kurt, don't you?
Yeah.
So he's sitting in the second row, and I'm thinking, oh, God. But anyway, towards the end of the talk, I start talking about mental pictures and, being able to have a mental picture of what you want. And I said, I'm not there yet, but I know people who can do it. And I said, Kurt, can you mentally picture what you want your horse to do and they'll do it? And he says, no, but I can with cattle.
Yeah. Yes. I think, and I would agree with that. I feel I can get cows to do stuff that I can't necessarily get my mules or my horses to do.
Mm.
And I think what gets in the way for me, and I know probably a lot of people, is the relationship part. Back to what we talked about in the beginning. With your horse or your mule, you get such an emotional connection that it's a relationship dynamic. It's like the difference between, it's just like if I mean, it's funny because like even me with my daughters, I got two daughters, they're 12 and 10, okay, and I can be telling her to do something all day long. It's funny. I was trying to help Ellie, my oldest daughter, with some leads with her mule. Her mule, she'd ask for the right lead to go left, and vice versa. And I'm trying to give her some tips and some suggestions and some things. Okay. And of course, there's the daddy daughter conflict.
Mm-hmm.
She goes to 4-H. It's like your story about the other trainer. She goes to 4-H, and the 4-H volunteer gives her the same suggestion that I did just, 10 minutes before. She's like, oh, that's great. My daughter came back and she told me, she said, well, Dad, you'll never believe this. Guess what she told me to do? This is a great idea. She repeats the suggestion. I'm like, and I held my tongue. I didn't want to, I don't want to ever be the guy that says, well, I told you to do that first. I don't
Yeah.
need because I don't need the credit. I don't need the
Yeah.
credit. I don't, but I'm thinking to myself, that's exactly what I told you. But I think it's like that with the other stuff we're talking about. You get a relationship with your horse or your mule, and sometimes it's hard to get into that mind space where with cows, I don't have a relationship with them. I don't. It's just matter of fact. It's just matter of fact. This is how it is. So there's no tension there. It's just they're a cow, and I'm the guy that's supposed to put them in the corral. It's almost just business, and so that, back to your relationship before horsemanship, I think it's just like a marriage or just like a family. The type of relationship you're building makes a huge difference, because I can have a
Mm.
relationship where my mule runs me over all day. Well, that's not the relationship that you're trying to teach or I'm trying to teach.
Yeah.
I think that makes a difference.
Yeah. When we would, back when we were doing the reining, sometimes at those big reining shows, I'd have a friend of mine who trains horses help my wife get ready because he could tell her exactly the same thing I told her. And it didn't have all the baggage, attached to it.
Yeah. 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 It's funny how that works.
And
It's
and and she totally gets that too. It's not like she denies that, but she
Mhm.
goes, yeah, I don't, there's no rejection of it. There's no, you know, is there an underlying, you have niggly things over the years, and they can all stay a part of everything you do with each other. And yeah.
It's like with the horses, you've seen this in clinics. Somebody's having trouble doing something. And I do step in less and less these days. In fact, I'm trying to step in less and less. I want the people to figure this out, but sometimes you know the deal. Sometimes you got to get it, you get in there. And it's interesting that a lot of times I'll step in and it just works out for me. And the person's like, wow. And I'm like, okay, now this isn't magic. This isn't, and I'm not like special gifted. In fact, I'm not gifted here. I've had to work really hard at these things. So I said, really the thing I've worked hardest at is being neutral here. I'm not
Mm,
stepping into this expecting your mule to drag me around, nor am I expecting things to go great. I'm just here now in the moment. I don't have all the baggage that you have and all the things, and I think so many people carry the past with them, and the future is pulling them at the same time, and they can't just be in the moment. It's like with the cows. I'm just there in that moment, and I'm visualizing them going through the gate, but that's just a second more. I'm not mad at the cows for you know well, that cow ran me over last week. Well, they're not
right.
my, maybe they did, but it's not mine.
Yeah. There's a book I read, or I listened to a lot of books last year. It would have been last year. And it was called uh, Becoming Human, I think. And the subtitle was 50,000 Years, Adventures in 50,000 Years of Consciousness. And so it was about how we've evolved along the way. But in this, so he's a British naturalist. And one of the things he did was he went and lived like a hunter-gatherer in the forests in the north of England. Like at one point in time, he didn't eat for 9 days. And when he did eat something, it was like a newt or some sort of little rodent. But anyway, he was talking about the trees. And he said this really weird sentence that made sense after I thought about it, but he said, I've never really seen a tree. As a matter of fact, it's been a long time since I've seen anything. Because when I look at a tree, because I'm a naturalist, I look at a tree, I identify what species it is and whether it's deciduous and what sort of funguses it has and all these facts about the tree, but I don't actually see the tree. He said, I once met a man who could see a tree, and he scared me so much. I hitchhiked back to Kathmandu I left the temple, hitchhiked back to Kathmandu, and took the next plane back to England. I once met a man who could see a tree. So you can just, what's in front of you is what's in front of you. There's no baggage attached to it. And for me, I found the better I got at doing that with horses, the less techniques I needed to have. At least I don't mean to train them to do things, but I mean, for the most part, at clinics, step one is getting these horses just to be relaxed in this environment with this human. Then the other stuff comes after that. And I found that the more I got to where I could see the horse, not what I thought the horse was going to be, oh, it's a warm blood or it's a whatever, the more I could just see the horse for who it was, there's got to be some sort of energy to that, or some sort of energy to all the other things, because it's been amazing just seeing the difference in horses when you can just see the horse for who they are right there, and not what you wish they were or what you wish they weren't, or whatever they're doing is perfect, and you're not trying to change it, you just see them for who they are. It's a really interesting concept, but I've felt it.
You've talked about judgment a lot in your past,
Mm,
and talk about it, energy. Like we've all walked into a room when you knew that they were talking about you, whether that's your business or not. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you knew.
yeah,
And there's two judgment energies happening right there. There's the energy you're feeling from knowing that they're judging you, whatever. But there's also the energy that you're putting out that you knew that you're being judged. So you're
right.
like you're throwing,
You're being
you know,
offended by
and then it's
you're
this
being offended
weird,
by being judged. Yeah.
yeah, and then it's this weird middle ground that is uncomfortable, and that's where it's really hard to it's really hard to engage like that for you to them or them to you. It's the same.
Mm.
And you talk about your judgments and once you tell that I know the story well, but tell
Yeah,
that
no,
story real
I'll tell a
quick.
story for your listeners. So I
Yeah.
had been been going to see a therapist, and then she suggested I do group therapy as well. So I was going along to these group therapies once a week, and we would always have some sort of a homework, and some sort of a mindfulness homework. And this one week they said, okay, so this week what we're going to do for homework is we're going to count our judgmental thoughts. So get yourself one of those little clickers like the bus conductor has or whatever, or put some pebbles in your pocket or whatever. But when you notice you have a judgmental thought, just either click your clicker or switch your pocket, a pebble over to the other pocket. Just count your judgmental thoughts. And I thought, well, I'll get 3 pebbles, stick in my pocket, and by the end of the day, they will have switched sides. The first day I started counting my judgmental thoughts, I had about 27 before breakfast. And you just don't realize you have all this subconscious dialogue going, and that's right, that's wrong, that's. And so the thing about counting judgmental thoughts I've found was not only do you become aware of how many you have, but you become aware of how many you have about yourself. And like we're our own worst enemy. We say bad things to ourselves without even knowing you're doing, oh, you're such an idiot, or you're so stupid, or those sorts of things. And do you know who Brene Brown is,
Yeah.
Ty? Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you guys don't know who Brene Brown is, she's in that therapy sort of world, but she talks about the difference between guilt and shame. And so guilt is a focus on behavior, whereas shame is a focus on self. So if you did something stupid, you could say, "Oh, I am so stupid." That would be shame. That was saying I'm stupid. Guilt would be, "Oh, I did something stupid." And what that allows you to do is do it differently next time. It's not a part of you, it's something apart from you. And I noticed with noticing the judgmental thoughts that when you notice you had a judgmental thought about, especially about yourself, and you go, "Oh, you're so stupid," then you go, "Hang on, no, I'm not stupid. I just did something stupid. But next time I'm going to try to not do that thing quite as stupid." And that year this was 2018. I wasn't doing, I'd stopped doing clinics and I was going to stay at home and go to therapy basically. And when I started traveling again at the end of that year, the first airport I was in, I'm walking along and, when I'm in airports, I people watch. At least I thought I was watching people. But what I realized was I was judging people. Everybody walking the other way, I'm like, you've got too many clothes on. You've got not enough clothes on. You need to step away from the hamburger. You need to eat 3 more hamburgers. You're too skinny. You're too tall. Oh, that's an ugly shirt. And it was constant without me even, before I didn't know it was there. Now I'm aware of these thoughts. And so I started to change those while I'm walking through the airport. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to wish everybody well. So everybody walking the other way, instead of judging them, I looked them in the eye, I gave them a little eye smile, whether they looked at me or not. And I thought to myself, may you be happy. So I'm walking along, may you be happy, may you be happy, may you be happy, may you be happy, may you be happy. And I get to the gate for my plane and I get there and I have this like warm, light sensation in my torso, which is totally the opposite of the heavy, dark sensation I would normally have in my torso, but was so normal that I didn't even know it was a heavy, dark sensation. It was just how I am. And by changing my judgments or being aware of my judgments and changing those things, it changed that energy in me. And it was about that same time that when people would hand me a horse at a clinic, instead of me having to do something to settle the horse down, a lot of times they just settle down. And you've heard stories about, say, Ray Hunt or whatever, whoever. Someone's got this horse and you hand them the horse and the horse acts completely different. I used to have to do things to help settle horses, and I still do. But what I found is that that non-judgmental energy has a huge effect on them. And it's just been it's not something I read and thought I'd try. It's just been things that have happened to me, like, oh, it's kind of like you with the principles of training. You look back, you're like, oh yeah, I've been doing all those all along. Yeah. I think there's some fundamental truths that we learn in different ways, but they're all fundamental truths.
Yeah. Something that I like to have my students do is when we begin the class or at some point during class, I'll have them tell me something that they're grateful for, in relationship to their mule or their horse. And there's always the person who says, "Well, I'm grateful they didn't buck me off today," you know.
Two
and
wrongs
and
don't make
and
a two
and
wrongs
then
don't
I
make a right.
yeah, and then I go ahead and judge them for such a low thought, right? Like, come on, think deeper here. And I try, I said, no, really, no, really, what are you, this whole thing, and I usually ask them, I says, does anybody here actually, ride for a living? Is there anybody here that makes a living on the back of that mule or that horse? And mostly no, right? Usually no. Once in a while, but usually no. And I'll say, okay, so is everybody in agreement that we are all doing this because it's fun? We enjoy it. We want the relationship. We want the experience. This is, and everybody's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, okay, then tell me something you're thankful for, something that you feel blessed with. And it's amazing talking about judgment, how that changes things.
Mm.
And there's always the question like, well, Ty or Warwick, what if I come home from work and I'm ornery? I had a bad day at work, and there's the chat that, well, it's too bad you couldn't leave work at work or have sorted that out. However, one of the easiest ways that you can sort it out right here, right now, because maybe you did have a bad day at work, but you want to go for a ride. Okay, I get it. One of the easiest ways to get your mind right and get that judgment and all those negative things out is just to start being grateful. And sometimes it's a literal exercise for people to be grateful. Like it,
Mm.
I watch some people and it's like they're in pain to express gratitude. I say, well, you keep practicing, keep digging. Those are your sit-ups. Those are your mental sit-ups right there. Get
But
after it.
don't you think that that's where I think what you and I do at clinics is basically you're a relationship counselor for the horse, mule, and the human.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're a marriage counselor and they're sick to death of each other, and like, what do you got to be grateful for? Nothing. Like,
Nothing.
sure, you can think of something, but there's a lot of times people will, people get suggestions to, in the morning, write 3 things you're grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other day I saw a little reel on Instagram or something or other, and it said it's a good idea to do it in the evening because then what you do, you spend the day looking for things to be grateful for. Because I've got to write something down tonight. So you can
Mhm.
start looking for them. Whereas if you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, God, what happened yesterday? What was I grateful for? What am I? Whereas if you do it at the end of the day, you start looking for things to be grateful for. And I think, that can change your energy about your horse or your mule too. Like if you're looking for the good things about him instead of looking for the bad things.
Oh yeah. It's the attitude of gratitude.
Mm,
Everybody likes somebody with that attitude of gratitude. It always feels good to be told thank you. No matter what. You hold the door for somebody, thank you.
mm.
Versus, and you've been there too. I mean, this is something I'm personally working through. The holding the door example. Well, what about how do I feel when I hold the door for somebody and they don't say thanks? That's the stuff that messes with your mind. You know what I mean? Because here I am, I want them, when they say thank you, it feels good. But what about when they don't say thank you? They just walk on through and they just on their phone. That's harder, and but
It is harder, but so
yes.
that lady I was talking about from Sweden had on the podcast. She has this little saying, and she calls it giving versus trading. Okay. And her interactions with horses, she says, I want to be giving, not trading. Trading
Yeah.
is I'm going to do this, so you do this. Whereas giving is just, and that relationship before horsemanship thing, initially it's all about the relationship before horsemanship. So you think about the horsemanship is the training part, the shaping of behavior, having an expectation of a behavior, whereas the relationship part is not. And think about that opening of the door thing. Okay. You got to think, am I giving or am I trading? Am I holding this door so that this person gives me something, some positive feedback? Or am I holding this door because I feel like it's a good thing to do? I'm giving you this with no expectation of you doing anything for me. I was talking to a girl at a horse expo here a couple of years ago. Went to dinner with her. I know her relatively well. And she was saying she's estranged from her brother. And she said, I want to reach out to him, but what if I reach out to him and he doesn't respond back? Like I said, well, depends the reason you're reaching out to him. Are you reaching out to him to extend that olive branch? Or are you reaching out to him to extend the olive branch so that you get something back? I said, if you can go into it with a giving perspective rather than a trading perspective, like I'm going to do this so you do this, that do it for yourself so that you know you've reached out and made an effort to reconcile this bit of a fracture in your relationship with your brother. But don't do it because you think he's going to respond back. Because I really feel like there's a different energy to that. Like
Oh, yeah.
something I suggest people do with their horses if their horses don't like to be caught or those sorts of things. They say, I just go out in the pasture and sit down, read a book, whatever, meditate, scroll through your phone. I don't care, but just go out there and just hang out, just be in their presence. Give them your presence with no expectation of anything happening. And if you do that often enough, they'll probably start coming up and hanging with you. But the problem, I had a lady come up to me at a booth at a horse expo. She says, I've been doing what you said. I've been going out and sitting in the pasture with my horse with no expectation. And I've been doing it for 2 weeks and he still hasn't come up to me. What should I do? And I said, but you've been sitting out there for the express purpose of him coming up to you. Remember, you're supposed to be sitting out there. You're supposed to be giving him your presence. Because I'm sure every time a human's ever shown up with that horse, they wanted something from him. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to give him your presence without any expectations. I said, but that expectation you say you don't have has an energetic signature that they can feel. And your horses, I said, have you ever been on when you were younger? Because she was older and married. So when you were younger, you ever go on a date with a guy? And even though nothing implicit said, you know that he's buying you dinner and having a conversation with you, not because he wants to enjoy dinner with you and enjoy the conversation with you. These are all things he's doing because he wants to get something back from it. And they said, yeah, I've had that a couple of times. I said, there's an energy to that. You can feel that he's not giving his time. He's trading his time for something. He's trading his time and money for something he's going to get back. And she kind of went, oh yeah, I've felt that before. Yeah. So, but yeah, there's an energy, but I'm really big these days on the giving versus trading thing. It's just a great way of looking at stuff.
Oh, yeah. And in life, all through life, not just with horses and mules, but with everything in life. And you're right about the energy. It's a total different feel. You and I have heard the word feel, all of our days in horsemanship, and Tom Dorrance was, he gets the credit for coining that, but that feel is something that, you know, you could change the word feel to that energy. Just use the word energy instead of feel. And it
You know
is.
what else you can use? So one of the last times I was reading, or a while ago, I was reading True Horsemanship Through Field by Bill Dorrance that Leslie Desmond wrote, And right in the very start of that, because that whole feel word has always confused me, like what exactly is it? Right in the very start of that, Bill was talking about, a foal can be laying down and something will happen, and the mare can brush that foal with her whiskers. And depending on the intention behind that, it could mean get up, we've got to go, or it could mean it's okay, stay down.
Yeah.
And I went, this book could be called True Horsemanship Through Intention. So,
Yeah.
part of feel is intention, part of feel is energy. The energy comes from the intention. So, yeah, it's one of those things you can't put your finger on it, but I think energy and intention are two of the big parts of it.
Yeah. Intention is so, I mean, that's a deal breaker or a deal maker. Your
Mm.
intention, you know, uh, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about to be intentional, you got to think. You got to picture it or whatever word you want to use. You got to You got to think about it to be intentional. Back to the, what do you want? And what do you want doesn't always mean, like you're saying, what I'm going to get. It means what do I want to have happen from this? And a lot of times for me, and this is hard to explain to my students, and maybe some of my listeners, listening right now, maybe they've turned it off already. I don't know. But sometimes I'm not trying to get my mule to do anything. I'm just trying to help them feel a certain way.
Mm.
I just want them to feel something when I'm around. You're talking about going out and reading or whatever, scrolling through your phone. I call that fence post horsemanship. And I call it fence post because there's been so many times where when I'm out fixing fence, you know, just
Pretty
putting a
soon they're
post
pulling the
in.
pliers out of your pocket.
Yeah, you got your bucket of tools and your stuff, and yep, they're all right here. And you know, some of the animals that have been the most scared of me, they seem to usually be the most curious as well, which
Yeah,
it almost always go hand in hand.
I do. I think the most fearful ones are also the most uh, also the most curious.
I think it's a sensitivity. I think they're feely. They're sensitive because they're sensitive to the energy that you're putting out.
Mm.
But that also, well, you've heard it a million times. A lot of the great horsemen I've ever met, they say, well, if I walk into a pen, I want that most sensitive one over there. And you're thinking,
Mm.
the average person's thinking, why would you want that one? That one ran to the corner,
Mm.
but, when it comes to actually getting some things done, I got a lot of friends, and I know you do too, in the working cow horse world. And that's exactly it. They're going to go pick that sensitive bugger over there that snorts at you, and the average trail rider's like, oh, I don't want that one, and they're like, I
Right,
want that one because those ones will hook onto that cow and they read cattle so good. Well, why do they read cattle? Because they're sensitive,
right.
and it comes back to us as well. So
Yeah. And the other part of feel is being able to feel them and feel what they might be going to do next. Like if you grew up around livestock, you get a feel for, what they're going to do before they do it. You can read that, you almost get a sixth sense around them. And that's I think the other types of feel are easier to teach people, but that knowing what's going to happen before it happens sort of thing,
yeah,
I think that one's harder because it just comes through being run over a lot or whatever, just being around, large farm animals for a long period of time, and you're around them so much, you start to pick up the consistencies about what they might be going to do next, sort of thing.
a lot of the great horsemen I've been around, that is subconscious to them.
Mm.
They don't just do it. In that book I was telling you about with winning in mind, he talks about working towards getting these things subconscious. And I told you about my coach, Louis Fields, earlier. Something he'd have us do that actually just dawned on me this morning, Work. I just realized now, what is it now? 20, what is it, 20 years, 15 years later?
You're
Okay, that
still
he
teaching,
was
yeah.
he was doing. I was listening to Andrew Huberman this morning. Okay. And he's talking about this weird sport where these guys box and then they play chess. You ever heard of that?
No.
Yeah. This is
Look
not
up,
this
look
this
up
is nuts.
Huberman.
So
So
they
Andrew
box.
Huberman is my wife's boyfriend, by the way.
Yeah, I
He
bet.
doesn't know that,
Yeah.
but he is.
So he's talking about this, and basically, and he's talking about, he's relating this to ice baths and stuff, right? So how you do something that gets your mind, you can't, you're not thinking clearly. This is more of a survival thing, right? So the boxing is that part of it. And then you have to get mentally focused to play chess and be success, just different parts of your brain you're utilizing, right?
Mm.
So he's talking about this, and I'm thinking about my coach and what he did to us, back when I was rodeoing. So he would have us almost pull down our horses. So we're saddled up, my bronc's saddled up, my rein is measured. All I got to do is finish cinching up real quick. It's going to take me 2 seconds, right? But he has us go run in the arena. Okay. And he's having us run and run and run until we're almost out of breath. Like we're
Okay.
huffing and puffing, right? And
Yeah.
then when he sees us breathing good, he says, "Okay, come on," and he'll have us come back in, cinch up really quickly. So no time to catch your breath. You're not catching your breath.
Yeah.
You're coming back cinching up, which is usually a breath taker, anyways. And then you
Mhm.
get on, nod your head, you make your ride. At the time, I mean, up until this morning, okay, I was thinking, well, he was just doing it for physical conditioning, right? Because you got on a few bulls. I've heard your stories, and
I got on more broncs than I got on bulls.
yeah, so it's a physical endeavor, no doubt, and so I was thinking, oh, this is physical conditioning, but this morning I'm thinking, oh my gosh, no, he was, and I don't know if he realized he was doing this or not, but getting that bronc ride to be more subconscious than conscious because
Yeah.
we're we're tired, we're breathing, our heart's pumping, we're not thinking clearly. It's hard to think clearly. Now you got to nod your head and you got to make a ride,
Yeah.
and your reflexes need to be subconscious, not
Right. He's going to
so
get you out of your head.
get out of your head,
Yeah.
and I've noticed that with a lot of great horsemen where they just do things subconsciously. They don't have to, by the time they think about it, it's too late anyways. Now, people have to go through that process. You're going to have to go through that process no matter what. You're not going to get out of that, learning process. You got to figure that out. But I think that's really when people start making changes is when they can click over to that subconscious.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, my farrier does the blacksmithing competitions. Like he's really good, like wins all over the world sort of thing. But he was saying this morning, the last time he was here, he was going to go to a blacksmithing competition in Fort Worth. And I asked him this morning, how'd you go? And he goes, my head just wasn't there. I'd practiced, I'd made 100 different shoes practicing for this thing. And he said, my head wasn't there. And we got talking about, I was telling him about when I went to the World Equestrian Games in 2018, I had a mental coach that a friend of ours from New Zealand named Jane Pike. She's been on the podcast. And early in the year, Jane did a Zoom call with me, and then she asked me a lot of questions. And then she said, "Okay, I'm going to give you this audio to listen to. Listen to it with stereo headphones." So she sends me this audio file, and I've got to listen to it as many times as I can. 2 or 3, 4 times a week, whatever. It's about half an hour long. And when it starts out, it's Jane in both ears. Both Janes are saying the same thing, but about 10 minutes in, one Jane keeps talking and another Jane shows up in this ear. So it's just like you're in a restaurant and you're hearing all these conversations. And it's
yeah.
weird. Sometimes you clue into the right ear, sometimes you clue into the left ear, sometimes you just blank out, sometimes you nod off. But went to the World Equestrian Games, and in the first round there, I had a personal best, and I was the most relaxed I've ever been competing. And here I'm at the World Equestrian Games. My butt cheeks are supposed to be puckered pretty tight. And I thought that was really weird. And then I thought there was something else different. What was it? And then I realized there was something missing. And the thing that was missing is, and I didn't even know the thing was there before it was missing, was I've always been prepared. I know what my horse can do. I know what I can do consciously, but subconsciously, there's been a voice that says, who do you think you are? What do you think you're doing? You can't do this. And I didn't even know it was there until it wasn't there. So it was in my subconscious. And apparently so Jane told me later, what this thing did was it tapped into your subconscious. Whichever one of her voices you're listening to is going into your conscious brain, but the other one is going to your subconscious. And I'm a big believer in that now so we made the semifinals. And so I competed in the semifinals and had another personal best in the semifinals and had exactly the same experience. And once again, this is a pressure situation. You're riding for your country, whatever. And it was the most relaxed and present I've ever been competing ever. And so, yeah, that whole subconscious thing, I realize it's a big deal.
Oh man. Oh man, it is. Well, Warwick, I know you got to get to your appointment here soon. I got one more question for you.
Ask
Um,
away.
you've already given tons of advice, and I mean, there's so many gems in this. Hope my listeners appreciate it because I do. But I always ask my guests this: if you had one piece of life advice, horsemanship advice, whatever, that you'd hope that would be recorded for the centuries, what would it be? What would you tell people if you had
It
one
would
piece
be
of
a
advice?
Wayne Dyer quote, and it's when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Oh yeah. Mic drop right there. That's
Mhm.
good. And you guys, you can read all about Work's journey in that. He talks about that extensively in his book. I mentioned his book, The Principles of Horsemanship by Warwick Schiller. You guys got to get it. So thank you so much, sir. I
Hey,
appreciate that.
it's been a pleasure. Good chatting with you.
Yeah, heck yeah. And all of you guys listening, I'd love it if you'd leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast. Um, Also, be sure to go check out everything the Warwick has to offer. He's got the Journey On podcast, which I am a longtime subscriber since the very beginning. Love the show. He's got a video library that's awesome. All kinds of master classes, all kinds of things going on. Where can tell them your website work?
It's www.warwickschiller.com.
There you go. Okay, guys. God bless you, and we'll see you down the road.